You've been sailing in the frigid Icelandic Sea for weeks. The icy wind batters your face, with the only thing distracting you from the pain being the even worse ache you feel in your stomach. Luckily, you have some months-old flatbread left stashed in your coat. You manage to rip a piece off and swallow, but the dense flatbread sits like a rock in your stomach. If only you could light a fire. At this moment, you want more than anything to enjoy a nice, warm, hearty stew. However, lighting a fire on your longship would certainly mean suicide, as its wood was highly flammable and sealed with combustible pine tar. And then you see it. In the distance is a small island covered in lush grass and vibrant heather. The purple flowers beckon you and your crew to land. As you draw nearer, you get a sick feeling in your stomach, but you dismiss it. Probably just the flatbread, you think, so you land anyways. The crew gets to starting a fire, but you hang back, making sure the ship is properly secured and docked. You see the gentle glow of the fire in the distance and head to join the rest of your men. Suddenly, a high-pitched moan, loud enough to burst your eardrums, fills the air. The ground begins to shake and the sea starts to rise. No, it's not the sea that's rising. In fact, you realize it's the earth itself that's sinking. You quickly unmoor and board the ship, screaming for the rest of your men, but it's too late. The island has now completely submerged, drowning your crew as you watch helplessly from the ship. Looking down in the water, you finally see it. An eye 10 times the size of your shield. In horror, you realize the stories were all true. You and your crew landed on a lungbacher, a massive, whale-like creature posing as an island. It submerges deeper into the unforgiving waters, leaving behind only the floating corpses of your brothers. And so you let out a final prayer to the gods as you're condemned to a fate worse than drowning, a slow death alone on the sea, never able to warn others of the heather-backed sea monster. The story of the lungbacher dates back centuries in Norse mythology, traditionally depicting the creature as malicious and highly dangerous. The story of the lungbacher likely manifested as a way to warn the people back then of the many dangers of the open ocean, inspired by real-life massive sea creatures like the sperm whale. But the story of the lungbacher persists even today, and so the lungbacher even shows up in a modern retelling of the Norse mythos, God of War Ragnarok. One of the first side missions you can do in God of War Ragnarok is titled Weight of Chains. In this mission, Mimir asks Kratos to help him right an old wrong. It turns out many years ago, Mimir enslaved this lungbacher to earn Odin's favor. To free the beast, we have to sever the chains restricting its fins and tail. As they are doing this, we can clearly see how much Kratos disapproves of Mimir's past.
You're angry with me, aren't you, brother?
I remember the feeling of a yoke around my neck. I would not wish it upon another.
Kratos is disappointed and even angry with Mimir since he knows how it feels like to have been enslaved. Kratos was a slave to Ares in the previous games, with the chains on his blades of chaos being a literal manifestation of the chains binding him to Ares' control. We also learned the reason Mimir enslaved the lungbacher.
Why enslave the creature?
Its fat was a good source of oil for Odin's lanterns.
Oil. For lanterns.
At this point, Mimir's actions seem absolutely horrific. Enslavement is obviously wrong in pretty much any scenario, but for it to be for something as trivial as lantern oil just really goes to show how far gone Mimir and the other Aesir were at the time. Kratos himself can't even be bothered to hide his disapproval for this fact, and we can clearly hear in his voice how disgusted he is by what Mimir has done. But I think Mimir clearly feels extremely remorseful for this. He himself now knowing the pain of being bound to a single place by Odin, and only having that pain to keep his mind occupied. Initially, he had been hoping that the lungbacher would have died, as he himself probably felt the same way when he was trapped. There's also a moment where Atreus tries to comfort Mimir by giving him an out, and saying that it's more so Odin's fault.
The mining river. They're mistakes, Mimir. But it's Odin's fault.
That's not an excuse, little one. But thank you for saying it.
And this moment kind of shows the naivete of Atreus, but also the wisdom of Mimir, since he essentially shoots that excuse down and takes full accountability for his actions. Kratos finally breaks the last chain holding the lungbacher down. However, it doesn't swim away, so he asks Kratos to bring him to the creature's eye to talk with it.
Go on, you great blubbering beast. Shoo! It's not moving. Why is it not moving?
It has grown accustomed to its chains.
But... No. No, we can fix this. We just need to chase it off. Scare it. Something.
There is no making things right. Only better than they were.
likes the wind blowing on its face. I can feel it.
May it provide some comfort.
The ending of this mission seems like it might be kind of anticlimactic at first, but I think it actually serves to deepen the message being told here. The chains binding it to the ground were broken, but the bindings on its tail and fins are still attached. Obviously, this literally shows us that not everything can be fixed, but symbolically as well. The mental scars from being chained have irreversibly changed the course of Lungbacher's life. It can no longer be truly free, even if there is nothing physically holding it back. This mirrors Kratos' character as well. He was chained for years to Ares, and although he is no longer bound to Ares, the scars left by the Blades of Chaos on his own arms symbolically represent how he has been forever changed by that experience. He has to live with the guilt of what he did under Ares' rule for the rest of his life, and while physically he is free, mentally he carries that weight, which will affect him forever. However, the message here isn't all doom and gloom. Mimir's actions have caused irreversible damage to the whale, but that doesn't mean he can't do something now to try and make things better. So, although Lungbacher will never be truly free, at least it can now enjoy the wind on its face. And it's also fitting that Atreus is the one to remind us of this. Atreus is for Kratos the wind on his face, the part of his life that brings him joy and love, despite the pain of his past. And so the weight of chains shows us that despite terrible, even irreversible traumas, joy and happiness can still be found. But this mission also made me wonder why Lungbacher was chosen for this message. You see, Lungbacher is basically a giant whale. It's a combination of a lot of different whales. It has teeth like a sperm whale, it's shaped like a minke whale, and its size is bigger than even a blue whale. But using a whale to tell this message actually makes a lot of sense. Humanity has a pretty messy relationship with whales. Whaling is the hunting of whales for their products, including meat and blubber, which have been used mostly for food and oil, but has various other uses. Whales seem to have been hunted since at least 3000 BC by indigenous communities in the south of Brazil. However, the whaling industry grew far larger and became much more widespread in the 19th century, primarily due to the increase in demand for whale oil, which was needed as fuel for lamps and machine lubrication. This demand was largely due to the Industrial Revolution, and by the late 1930s, it's estimated more than 50,000 whales were killed every year. Several whale species were brought to the edge of extinction because of the whaling industry and remain endangered today. However, before the whales became completely eradicated, many countries started to ban whaling with a 5-year pause on all commercial whaling enacted by the International Whaling Commission in 1982. And although the moratorium was initially meant as a temporary measure, it has been indefinitely extended to the current day. There are now only 3 countries that currently practice commercial whaling, those being Japan, Norway, and Iceland. There are a lot of connections to the story of Lungbacher in God of War and the real-world whaling industry. First is the Nordic connection. God of War Ragnarok is heavily inspired and based on Norse mythology. Culturally, the Norse have engaged in whaling for centuries. Although with the Industrial Revolution, whaling turned into a huge commercial industry, becoming especially profitable for Nordic countries. In fact, the exploding harpoon, which revolutionized the industry and allowed for the killing of whales like never before, was invented by a Norse man named Sven Foyd. Today, 2 of the only 3 countries that still practice commercial whaling are Nordic, those being Norway and Iceland. Additionally, Lungbacher being found in the realm of Svartalheim is significant as well. A big part of what caused whaling to become a gargantuan industry was the Industrial Revolution. Svartalheim is by far the most industrial of all the realms you visit in God of War Ragnarok. There are huge mining rigs and factories all over, and the dwarves themselves are known for their industriousness. However, we see how this gets taken to the extreme, with Lungbacher being enslaved and harvested for its oil, similar to how in the real world whales were killed for their oil. I also think Lungbacher's condition itself is representative of the current state of our whale populations. The whaling industry is responsible for many whale species becoming endangered, and even after whaling has mostly ended, whale populations are not likely to ever return to their original population sizes, partly due to decreased genetic diversity, irreversible changes humanity has incurred on the environment, such as global warming, destruction of other species like krill, which are crucial for recovering whale populations. But the data does suggest many whale populations are at least moving in a positive direction. This is really similar to the story of Lungbacher in God of War Ragnarok. Lungbacher has been through a lot, just like our real-world whales, and the consequences of that are irreversible. But that doesn't mean there's nothing to do for Lungbacher and also our whales. In God of War, we can break some of the chains and bring Lungbacher some happiness. In our real world, there's a lot of conservation work that has been done, and while we can't reverse all of the effects we've had on these animals, we can bring some of them back. So I see Lungbacher, a giant, single monstrous whale, representative of the story of actual whale populations. Lungbacher is the story of a ginormous whale, a creature so large its story has lived for hundreds of years. But the way we think about lungbacher has changed from its first appearance. Originally in the Orvar Odd saga written in the 13th century, the story of lungbacher was one of fear, depicting a malicious and treacherous creature that would intentionally trick men into landing on it so that it could drown them. And this story was born of the people at the time's understanding of the ocean and the creatures in it. The sea was a scary place, full of danger and mystery. Whales themselves were elusive, and seeing large cetaceans in dark, icy waters likely stoked both fear and imagination. But as the years passed, the ocean and the whales became much more understood. Whales could be hunted for industry to the point of near extinction, but even then our understanding of these animals was incomplete. In later years, we've learned of the great intelligence they possess, even their culture, and their importance to the environment as a whole. And so with that understanding, the story of lungbacher has changed in a much more sympathetic direction. In God of War Ragnarok, lungbacher is depicted as a large, majestic creature, unfairly bound by greedy and prideful gods for something as inconsequential as lantern oil. These stories are shaped by our understanding. Understanding ultimately breeds empathy, something both Mimir and Kratos have grown to learn. Both have empathy for lungbacher because they themselves know what it feels like to be in its situation. But understanding doesn't have to only come from experience. Hopefully understanding can also come from the people around us. Atreus knows to help lungbacher not because he knows what it feels like to be imprisoned, but because he has been shaped by the people closest to him. He's learned from their stories, and more importantly, their actions. And so I believe that the story of lungbacher has changed because of our understanding of whales and our desire to right past wrongs.